Ladies and gentlemen, we are today we are into the 44th lecture of this course, and I wish by this time you have got a very broad idea of this subject. We have already covered with our lectures a large part of the course. So, today we are going to discuss in our 44th lecture the pilot study and pre-testing. You must have heard about the pilot study frequently if you have the chance of interaction with the researchers. Is a very important step in the research. What is that? After the literature has been carefully studied or the literature review has been done, the experts consulted, the researcher still have only a rather vague idea of what are crucial elements in his or her problem. A pilot study or pilot survey, as sometimes called, may then be launched as a step preliminary to the formation of a schedule. Why? To, in fact, find whether the schedule or to prepare the schedule according to the crucial elements of this problem, and so that crucial elements of the problem that we took to study must be covered. So, it is a preliminary study, a preliminary step to the formulation of a schedule. The pilot study is a preliminary study conducted on a limited scale before the original studies are carried out in order to gain some more information, on the basis of which the main project would be planned and formulated. The pilot study is undertaken without formulation or formulating any hypothesis about the problem, because if it is done in the very beginning, then it could be changed. It is made on a small sample, but it is necessary that the individuals of the same sample should form the actual group to be studied. So, we cannot go out of the sample. We have taken the sample from the population through the help of the sample designs that we had selected from our in the beginning of our research. So, the sample, from the sample itself, this pilot survey objects or the respondents are to be chosen, not from outside, because they are not going to reflect the characteristics of sample which is to be broadened or generalized for the for the whole of the population. So, it is a small sample of the sample, one can say that it is made on a small sample, but it is necessary that individuals of the sample should form the actual group to be studied. So, one can say that it is sample of the sample. That is, they should be respondents who act as representatives of the entire group of respondents. At this stage, all that can be formulated is an interview guide. Thus, the researcher studies the field in a very non-directive fashion. The pilot study has to identify the variables involved in research. How come it happens? The pilot study enables the researcher to gain some systematic knowledge of the universe and its population, on which it would be based the main or principal study. So, suppose we are working on the satisfaction levels of students from teaching at a university. So, what we do? We select a sample and then the pilot study is undertaken to the problem. This enables the researcher to gain some systematic knowledge of the universe or the population. This plays a very vital role in identifying the various variables involved in research, the nature of the problem, the nature of the respondents, possible difficulties in the process of interview, kind of response that are likely to be available, etc. Very useful for identifying the various variables in the research. So, what would be the variables for studying the level of satisfaction of a student by teaching? The nature of problem. What are the nature of respondents? How are they students? How do they respond? Are they research scholars or masters or UGs, undergraduates? That is known by the researcher through the pilot study. So, the what problems would come in the process of interview, in the process of data collection, what problems are going to be encountered. So, those should be known in advance so that remedial measures could be taken, or the how kind of response that are likely to be available, etc. So, on the basis of information gathered or experience gained during such a study, the schedule questionnaire is then framed. So, the researcher has gone to the field of the problem, to the sample, to some of the sample of the problem that he or she identified for doing research upon. So, on the basis of these information gathered, the such a study schedule and questionnaire would be formed. So, suppose if we are working on Indian migrants from Gulf who have come back, who have returned to their own country, that is India, and then how is their economic adjustment, their social adjustment in India. After that, they have served a long time, even 3 decades, 4 decades in those countries. What is their problem here? So what we do, we of course we cannot take data from each and every Indian migrant. So we develop a sample through the sample design. And what does pilot study means? That we should take up a very small, on a very small level, the a, a kind of, say, exercise for identifying the variables, identifying the problems that would occur in the research program, and of course the any the ideas, or the that how the schedule or questionnaire is framed, so that it captures the problem very efficiently, because the schedule or questionnaire is to be developed, but it is to be developed in such a way that it is able to include in itself all the aspects, almost all the aspects of the life of those who have returned from working from the Gulf countries for 3 decades, 4 decades. So if after working on them, on a few of them, as a pilot survey, study or survey, if we if the those informations that have been collected are incorporated to the development of schedule and questionnaire, rather they must be incorporated in developing the schedule and questionnaire, then one can say that this schedule or questionnaire would be very realistic and meaningful, because it is already based on a small study of the subjects that have to be studied in the larger context. Then the value of the pilot study. Informal techniques will remain invaluable at the pilot study of even formal surveys to provide guidance on what are the important questions and how they should be asked. Pilot studies and pre-tests are a standard practice with professional survey bodies and are widely used in research surveys. So, when we are the survey bodies, who professional survey bodies, who in fact they use this practice of the pilot studies and pre-tests very widely. So the pilot study provides guidance on the adequacy of the sampling frame from which it is proposed to select the sample. The variability with regard to the subject under investigation within the population to be surveyed. The non-response, non-contact rate to be expected. How many people would respond? How many people would not be able to approach? This estimation becomes clear if a pilot study or pre-testing is done. The suitability of the method of collecting the data. If we suppose we choose interview method, but the researcher found that no, this method would not be proper, observation method is proper, then what happens? It is a very, very small study of the whole, so there is no problem. The researcher would revise his, his statistical design, and then of course he or she would go to collect data according to their design. So the the non suitability of the method of collecting the data is very much well known from the pilot study. The adequacy of the questionnaire, accuracy, efficiency and clarity, the kind of interviewers and respondent. How was the questionnaire? Whether it included all the important questions regarding the life or regarding the research that we are going to undertake for the problem, or the questionnaire needs to be revised, put in some more important questions and pull out some unimportant questions. That is an issue which is solved by the pilot study. The accuracy, efficiency and clarity and kind of interviewers and respondent, everything comes to the fore of the mind of the researchers, because he uh, he or she has gone for the pilot survey or the pilot study. The efficiency of the instructions and general briefing of the interviewers, that is also known from the pilot study. The codes chosen for the pre-coded questions, that is to decide upon the alternative answers to be answered for in the coding. This exercise, the exercise of pilot study gives idea or revised idea, or to say recommend the improvement in these process, and then this is adopted by the researcher in when he studies the large on the large basis or on a big sample. The probable cost and duration of the main survey and of its various stages, suggesting where economies can be made. The cost data will also have a bearing on the sample design. So it is further useful, the cost of the various stages and whether the sample design have to be simplified or not, because if the sample design is simple, then sample design is simple, then of course cost will be lesser, whereas in complicated sample designs the cost would increase. The efficiency of the organization in the field, in the office and in communications between the two. Common sense suggests that the necessity of doing a few test interviews or sending out trials forms by way of preparing for the main survey and such informal trial and error are a much part of the preliminary study, as are talks with experts and study of the literature. But it is further necessary to go and try out systematically all the various features of the main inquiry. This may take the form first of a series of small pre-tests on isolated problems of the design, and then when the broad plan of the inquiry is established, of a pilot survey, a small scale replica of the main survey. So comes the issue of pre-testing. The pilot survey is a replica. of the main survey, whereas the pre-test is done on the isolated problems of the design, so that the problem of the design is well known from the very beginning and the improvement can be carried out in the design itself. So, pre-testing or preliminary testing is the process of an advanced testing of the study design after the schedule questionnaire has been prepared. The object of pre-testing is to detect the discrepancies that have crept in and to remove them after necessary modifications in the schedule and questionnaire. The popular adage that only the shoe wearer knows where the shoe pinches applies in case of the schedule as well. It is a much more, so the pre-testing is a much more formal step than a pilot study. It is in fact like a theatrical dress rehearsal of the final study. Consequently, every part of the procedure must be laid out exactly as the final study. The final study will be carried out, the intervening instructions, whether for the individual or for a team, should be in final form and followed precisely so as to see whether they will be adequate. If the questionnaire is to be used, the cover letter or instruction should be put in the final form and the sample must have the same design as that to be used in for the full scale study. The pre-testing helps in enriching the design of the schedule questionnaire and assists in testing the validity and reliability of testing statistical techniques to be adopted for data processing and analysis. So, here it is again we find that the testing of the validity and reliability of the statistical techniques is also to be checked through the pre-testing. Which kind of a statistical technique to be used, which would be valid for the particular problem, that is the issue of the larger research, and of course how reliable they would be. These are all subjects which have to be in fact checked and if needed revised in the pre-testing process. Thus, the pre-test is the proving ground for the sample design and it is a means of how well interviewers perform, respondents behave and procedures work in practice. So, it is the pre-test which gives us the ground for the or rather testing for the sample design and how the interviewers would perform, respondents behave and procedures would work in practice. So, the pre-testing is also pre-testing gives us these advantages. Many indicated the following as gaps or symptoms of defective schedule questionnaire which may be seen during the pre-testing. Lack of proper order in responses, all or none responses, large number of do not know or do not understand answers, many qualified answers or irrelevant options, high proportion of refusals to answer, high degree of variance in answers when the question order is changed, similar type of people giving different types of replies, answers differing known answers, in case of questionnaire, refusal to it, marginal comments of interviewers or respondents concerning particular questions. So, for diagnosing the problems with population definition and unit selection field and field logistic pre-tests give a significant information. For example, relative population size, geographic dispersion, cluster concentrations, settlement patterns, significant cultural subgroups, substitutability of definitions, and stratifying classifications, effects of classifications on dependent variables, restrictions on definitions. These are some of the benefits which would be the researcher get from the pre-testing. Also, the sources and patterns of variability, degree of subgroup homogeneity and heterogeneity, type and size of sample design needed per stratum, rationale for proportionate or disproportionate selection, effect of splitting population units in intervals, incidence and type of floating populations, extreme values in the population, range of responses, measures of control tendency, and text of direction hypothesis. These are the benefits. Further, adequacy and accuracy of the secondary data and maps, geographic and alternative administrative boundaries and jurisdictions, use of partial lists with multi-stage selection, comparison of alternative enumeration problems, reliability of the informants. Fourth, distribution of important study characteristics, relevance and relativity of characteristics, as well as various population dynamics such as migration and movement, fertility and mortality rates, occupational groups, health conditions, literacy levels, socio-economic levels, and land use patterns. Then physical accessibility, distances, modes of transportation, climatic variations, non-motorable roads, natural barriers, formal and informal communication links, institutional developments. Then estimation of time and material resources. It requires at all project phases such as time and cost by stages of selection and type of procedure, transportation and logistic needs, field supplies and equipment, field support communication, cost of subcontracted services, training facilities, and audiovisual materials, sequence, area coverage. And critique of the supervisors, interviewers, training curricula, deficiencies, staff incentives, supervisor to interviewer ratios, frequency of supervisory contact, problems with respondents and errors in classification selection of the sampling units, rapport building techniques, methods of village entry and study explanation, explanation of sampling procedure, interviewers dress and demeanor. These all are to be found from the problems or the limitations of all these are can be found from the pre-testing. Similarly, the customs and practices to overcome in respondent selection, lack of privacy and other obstacles in interviews, screening questions to determine respondent eligibility, self other difference in reporting, sample disposition of the households and respondents, rates and reasons for non-response, why they are not responding, success rates by number of callbacks, best time of day or day of week for interviewing, characteristics of unavailable respondents, improvement in respondent selection procedure, field error checking, types of ongoing data, processing and analysis. This all are this is in fact this we can find from the pre-testing. Further, the types and levels of measurement, that is the sensitivity, relevance, comprehension, etc., local language, meanings, translation problems, standardization of measures, estimation procedure to use or recall, observation, supplementary data needed, quality control checks, verification methods by types of units, by types of data, improvement in the analysis plan. These are all the these are all the gaps or symptoms which are known from the pre-testing, and this is why pre-testing is in fact also very important. So we discuss the pilot study also, and we discuss the pre-testing also. What is the difference between the two, and the the why should we adopt the pilot study or the pre-testing? As we said that both pilot study, as we discussed that both pilot study and pre-testing are done on a limited number of the sample elements, sample units. Pilot study is done basically to check the 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 efficacy of the questionnaire or schedule, or to finalize it on the basis of the inputs received from the pilot study when it is done over there. Because in pilot study we would find the that there were some questions which were not necessary, but they were in the questionnaire. We shall be taking those out, and we would find that there would be some questions which were necessary but were left out. So what we have to do is to bring in those questions which the pilot study seems that thinks that should be necessary for collecting the data from the project, for the project, and also which questions are unnecessary, not suited or related to the study of the problem. They should be taken out to be replaced by more relevant questions. So although both are a small scale studies, but the pre-testing is a kind of theoretical dress rehearsal. That is, the every part of the procedure have to be studied in the pre-testing. The designs also, the sample design also, the statistical designs also, the statistical techniques also, they are all to be studied in the pre-testing. So in pre-testing is not is to test the whole of the research design, so that the problem at every stage of the design is well known in advance by spending a small money or from the budget. If the researcher does not adopt pilot study or pre-testing to save the money, then what would happen? That while implementing the research, the researcher can encounter problems in questionnaire, problems in the sample design, problems in the statistical design, problems in the statistical techniques. Hmm. So, the researchers, especially for the large studies, they are strongly recommended that they should go for a pilot study also and for a pre-testing also, because if they have not done this to save some part of their expenditure, then it is going to complicate their research process, complicate their research implementation. So, not only a pilot study has to be undertaken for large studies so that the questionnaires or the schedule becomes as perfect as possible, as suitable as possible, but also by pre-testing all the designs are also checked, hmm, so that the designs also become as perfect as possible and as suitable as possible, because even we if we decide, if the researcher decides not to go for pre-testing and checking how the design of the whole study, then what is going to happen, that again he is going to have to encounter very serious problems in the process of research. And this is why the researchers are strongly recommended, especially in large projects, to go for pilot study to check for the uh, for the questionnaire and schedule, and to go for also go for pre-testing to check the efficacy and the efficacy also, and the suitability of the various designs of research. I wish I have been able to clear you in this pilot study and pre-testing lecture, clear your concepts. I wish I have been able to make it clear to you all. Thank you very much.